Hello everyone and welcome. My name's Sam Goff. I'm the editorial director here at Klassiki. Our collection of classic Soviet titles includes one of the most influential films of all time, Sergei Eisenstein's The Battleship Potemkin. Now, Eisenstein's name is probably familiar even to casual cinephiles, but the ups and downs of his remarkable life and career bear examining in a little more detail. Eisenstein, pronounced Eisenstein in Russian, was born in Riga before moving as a child to St. Petersburg. At the age of 20, he abandoned engineering school to fight for the Red Army in the civil war that followed the October Revolution. This is where he got his first taste of propaganda work. After the war, he would move to Moscow, and that's where his artistic career really took off. Eisenstein initially worked in theatre, most notably alongside the great avant-garde impresario Vsevolod Meyerhold. He became exposed to the world of film when he fell into the orbit of the director Lev Kuleshov, who taught him the principles of what's known as montage theory, which is a filmmaking style with which Eisenstein would become synonymous. Now, put simply, this is the idea that the most powerful property of cinema lay in the edit, that is, in its ability to cut from one image to another, to juxtapose different images in order to produce new ideas and sensations in the audience's mind. To take a famous example, at the end of his debut feature, Strike, from 1925, Eisenstein cuts between documentary footage of a cow being slaughtered in an abattoir with dramatized footage of striking workers being gunned down by the armed police. And the juxtaposition of these two images creates a new idea in the mind of the audience, namely, the workers are treated like animals. Now, this might seem simple to us now, but it's hard to overstate what a radical leap forward this was for film theory at the time. Montage opened up new ways of communicating using film, and perhaps most importantly, it made the viewer into an active participant in that process, a radical idea that matched Eisenstein's radical politics. Now, Eisenstein's filmmaking evolved rapidly from these early steps. The same year that he completed Strike, he was already working on the film for which he's best known, Battleship Potemkin. This dramatization of a famous naval mutiny that took place in pre-revolutionary Ukraine shows Eisenstein experimenting with crowd choreography, extended action sequences, and intricate rhythmic editing. The famous Odessa Steppe sequence, in which protesters are gunned down by soldiers, is one of the most widely quoted and referenced sequences in film history. These films helped to establish the young Soviet film industry on the international stage, although Eisenstein's increasingly experimental approach to film form began to draw the consternation of those at home. His third historical film, the 1928 epic October, was intended as a part of celebrations to mark the 10th anniversary of the October Revolution. At this point, Eisenstein was speaking in terms of what he called intellectual montage, attempting to find visual means to convey complex political theory. Critics complained that his films were becoming unintelligible to the masses. Eisenstein spent most of the next 4 years abroad, travelling first in Western Europe, then the US, and then Mexico with his friend and assistant Grigory Alexandrov. In the US, he met two of his filmmaking idols, Charlie Chaplin and Walt Disney. He spent more than a year with Alexandrov in Mexico, putting together material for a proposed film about that nation's own revolutionary history, funded by the wealthy American socialist author Upton Sinclair. However, under pressure from Stalin and his increasingly exasperated benefactors, Eisenstein returned to Russia without completing the film and never had access to the footage that he had shot there, to his great dismay. The film was never completed, although Alexandrov did reconstruct a kind of version of it later with the surviving reels. In Mexico, Eisenstein had become fascinated by indigenous and religious art. He had started thinking in terms of pre-logical and so-called primitive ways of thinking. But back in the Soviet Union, Stalinism was in full swing. Eisenstein found himself at odds with Boris Shumyatsky, the head of the Soviet film industry. And Eisenstein narrowly avoided arrest, or worse, in 1937 when his film Bezhin Meadow was cancelled in the middle of production. Ultimately, it was Shumyatsky who would be executed during the purges of that period. Needing to find a way to get back into favour and quickly, Eisenstein accepted a commission, Alexander Nevsky. Now, this is a film about a medieval Russian prince who repelled an invasion of Teutonic knights in the 13th century. The relevance of this story on the eve of the Second World War is fairly obvious. The film was more conventional than Eisenstein's earlier works, though still very striking. It was a huge hit at home and in the Allied West, although ironically it was pulled from screens in the Soviet Union after a few months when Stalin signed the Molotov-Ribbentrop Pact of Non-Aggression with Nazi Germany. Evacuated along with most of the rest of the Soviet film industry to Central Asia during the war, Eisenstein took on one final commission, and this one reportedly from Stalin himself. It was another epic medieval biopic, this time of Ivan IV, aka Ivan the Terrible. Stalin was understandably fascinated by the figure of the iron-fisted Tsar who united the Russian state through violence against its internal and external enemies. Unable to turn down this commission, Eisenstein was forced to walk a tightrope between his personal artistic integrity and the threat of reprisal. Eisenstein worked again, as he had on Alexander Nevsky, with the composer Sergei Prokofiev and an unfamiliar for him creative team, including the great actor Nikolai Cherkasov in the title role. Eisenstein completed 2 films of a planned Ivan the Terrible trilogy. These films are psychologically rich, visually extravagant, expressionistic panoramas of medieval courtly life. The first instalment, which was completed in 1944, which depicts Ivan triumphing over his enemies in the court, was a huge hit with Stalin. It won Eisenstein his second Stalin Prize, a high honour at the time. But the second instalment, in which Ivan succumbs to paranoid violence in his attempts to put down perceived enemies, understandably did not land so well with its intended audience and was banned from Soviet screens until 1958. A fittingly paradoxical end for a filmmaker who had made a career out of contradictions. Eisenstein died at the age of just 50 in 1948, whilst working on the third and final instalment of Ivan the Terrible, a film that was never finished and of which only a few frames survive.